Guys, I'm Mark Strigl, and we are thrilled to have a man who has sold over 80 million records with his band Journey, and probably many million more when you add in everything else you've done. Neal Schon. Neal, thanks so much for hanging out here with us at Guitar Center. It's a thrill to meet you and speak with you. How are you?
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
And today is the 100th birthday of the great late Les Paul. What does Les mean to you personally and professionally? I believe you knew him, right?
I had the opportunity of meeting Les here in New York, at the Iridium. I was here in, I believe in 2000, doing a new Journey record, and we were doing it in New York, and so we went down to the Iridium, and he just kind of called me on stage, and I picked up an axe that was a Les Paul that he had sitting on stage, and we started playing, and I guess he liked what he heard from me, and we became friends after that. And actually gave me that guitar that night, signed it. And Les was a great guy, he just was a great human being, and beyond, an amazing guitar player and somebody that was just created everything before anybody could even think of it. I mean, this many years later, they're coming out with pedals that are doing what he was doing way back then,
right, yeah.
With the octave above guitar, with him slowing down the tape and then playing it slower and then speeding it up. It sounded like a whammy pedal, stuck in an octave above. And it's just quite amazing, his imagination, where it took him and what he was able and capable of doing, with multi-tracking before Beatles or anybody.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And imagination, that's just a
and
key
the electric,
word, yeah.
The electric guitar, everybody should think now, anybody that plugs into an amplifier, if it wasn't for Les, there would be no amp and cord,
You also have designed your own guitar, the beautiful Paul Reed Smith guitar, which has been out a number of years now, right?
I've been working on, I have 3 models with Paul. Even though his website is not up to date, we're going to kick his ass after he hears this. Right. Anyway, so this is an NS14, which is a semi-hollow body, solid, underneath the middle, right under the pickups and the bridge, and then the rest of it is hollow. I have a NS15, which is a 15-inch body. This is the 14 model that goes under that, and now there's a solid body 13-inch single cut with a new neck joint, very similar to the one that I designed. It was on my old Les Paul.
Interesting. And the hollow body version, which we're looking at here, it's really a different, unique thing to put a Floyd on a hollow body, right?
I try all kinds of different things. I tried a regular stock wraparound bridge, and I found that the Floyd on the bigger body and these sounded better to myself. It was a little more stout. And I love the fact with the Floyd, whether you're going to use the bar or not, I love that it's locked down.
Sure.
For how many live performances I do a year, I don't necessarily like to change guitars or tune up in between songs when I'm on stage. And so it's become just something that I feel comfortable having on the guitar. And I love the way it sounds. And, I see a lot of people, different companies now that are, when I first brought the idea up to Paul was like, this is kind of bizarre. He goes, I don't think anybody's going to like this. And I said, well, just build it for me then. I know I'm going to like it.
Yeah.
And, I've had a lot of people say that's, it's crazy. But now I'm seeing like Gretsch come with a hollow body, solid down the middle, and they have a Bigsby on it. They haven't put a Floyd on it yet, but give them a few more months.
Right on. And is this the guitar you primarily used on the new Vortex album that is coming out June 22nd?
Yeah, I used all Paul Reeds. A few songs were this guitar, a few were the 15-inch. I didn't have the actual 13-inch that I have now. I had some old ones, and I had some old McCartys, and I used those. And then I also used some custom Strats that were made for me by Fender luthiers at Fender Shop, Custom Shop. And those are solid mahogany all the way through the bottom. They're not bolt-on necks. They're my neck joint that I also had on the old Les Paul that they copied, and curly maple top.
Nice. And this record that's coming out is kind of exciting for me personally because it's reuniting you in the recording studio, at least with the one and only Steve Smith, who played on so many classic songs with you through the years. How was it reconnecting with him and working with him again?
You know, I actually connected before this record. A few years back, I did The Calling with my other solo record with Steve Smith, and it was the first time that we actually got together in years and played together and created music together. And it was a wonderful experience because, you know, Steve is not only a great drummer, he can envision. You know, we can sit and talk. I can bring in like a loop that I made at home. Basically, all these records were made from like a little Line 6 looping machine. Right. In a basic rhythm of tempo that I had in my head. And the closest I could get to rhythm, whatever I could find in the rhythm machine in there. And then just a riff, you know. And I would go in the studio with the looper, plug it into the board, and I'd go down, you know, the 100 ideas that were crammed on there. And I'd stop at 56 or whatever idea I liked. And we would, you know, work on it for a while. And the Calling, what I did with Smith was we'd pick a riff, a particular riff, and a rhythm that I liked, and I'd have him loop it for about 8 bars, and then I'd tell him to go take a lunch break, and I'd like sit there and arrange it and put it together with just basically rhythm guitar. And then Steve would come back, and he'd listen to it, and then he would write it out. He'd score it out, and then we'd sit down and we'd talk, and I go, okay, this section is going to be like a keyboard solo or a heavier guitar solo here.
So he's actually transcribing stuff on paper?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, he writes everything out.
That's
and so then, and I say, this is going to be like the biggest crescendo. We're going to build here. So while you're playing it, you know, imagine the rest of the band in there. And he would go out and just play it like 1-2 takes, and it just sounded amazing, you know. And some of the takes that we did where the ideas were a little bit more well-formed, like on this record, we just jammed. Cool. I just jammed, and I played a lot of live soloing, and without really knowing exactly what was going to go on in some of the other sections, and then just, you know, form-fit it later in Pro Tools and wrote different sections at different times and then move them together. Nice. And so, like, I've been in rehearsal with Omar because Steve was not available to play this show tonight for Les Paul's 100th anniversary. And so I got Omar Hakim, and he put together a band of cats here in New York City that are just amazing. Right. And so it was my first experience of, you know, trying to play any of this stuff from beginning to end. And I was like, oh, my God, there's a lot to remember. So I was glad that I had a couple days to rehearse.
Excellent. And there's a song on the record called Miles Beyond, which is, I guess, a tribute to Miles Davis. And I wanted to ask you, did you ever meet Miles Davis? Because I know you actually played on his wife's record a long, long time ago, right?
Betty Davis. I did, yeah, the Betty Davis record. I did that with Greg Arrico and Larry Graham from the Sly Stone Band, and that was a pretty funky record. But I did meet Miles with a couple of the Santana guys, Carlos and Michael Carabello. And it was one of his last concerts. I saw him at Berkeley Community Theater. Cool. And, you know, he sounded like Miles. It's right. Amazing.
Great stuff. And you mentioned Carlos Santana. And how did a 15-year-old kid end up in Carlos's band? I mean, he was pretty major star already at that point. I mean, and you were really just, 15 years old. How did you get that gig?
You know, I really don't know. I was playing in a club with another band in the Bay Area. I lived at, you know, in a little apartment with my folks at the time in San Mateo, in the peninsula from San Francisco. And I was playing with the band I was in, which was called Old Davis. And the bass player in the band knew Greg Raleigh and Michael Shreve. So he invited them down. And they were hearing about me through the grapevine, come check this kid out. And, you know, I had been playing a lot at Keystone Corner in San Francisco at Michael Bloomfield's old club with Elvin Bishop. Right. I managed to meet Elvin Bishop through a great friend of mine, Jackie Villanueva, that, you know, was basically my chauffeur when I was really that young. He's taking me back and forth to the city to meet all these guys and so I could play. And, you know, the word got out. Greg and Michael Shreve came in one night after we finished, and the club owner let us close down the club, and we played till like about 5 in the morning, you know, with nobody in there. And then it was, I proceeded to be picked up by Greg every day, you know. At the high school, I was sort of not going to at that point. I was playing a lot of guitar, and he would just pick me up, and I'd go to his father's place in San Mateo or San Bruno.
Okay.
And he had a piano in there, and we'd just sit there and jam. And then pretty soon, you know, I was in a studio hanging with the guys, just hanging, while they were doing a Abraxas at Wally Heider's in San Francisco. And they, you know, set me up in a room off to the side with an amp, and I just sit in there and listen to records and practice. Wow, the whole time.
Cool. Great story. Great story. Bad English is a band you sold millions of records with back in the late 80s, early 90s. How do you look back on that stage in your career and that band?
Well, you know, it was the 90s, and so there was a lot of hair going on. But, you know, all in all, when I hear that record, it kind of came out of nowhere. And at that point, I had just finished my first solo record, not the two previous ones that I did with Jan Hammer. They were co-solo, you know, records. And I did my record Late Night. And I had Omar Hakim on it, playing drums, and Randy Jackson playing bass. And great musicians. Steve Smith played on a few. And I was going to do my own thing at that point because Journey was on a long hiatus and I was getting in too much trouble. So I was like, I got to get busy doing something, you know, positive here. And at that point, I was playing a one-off gig with some different guys and rehearsed in this little place. And I went down one day to pick up my gear that I left there. And I heard this drummer just bombastically playing through the walls. And so I peeked in, you know, the door because I go, wow, this guy sounds really amazing. And it was Dean Castronova.
Sure.
And
current drummer of Journey.
You know, I met him and I just said, wow, who are you?
Yeah.
And he told me he was playing with Tony McAlpine at the time. And I said, here's my number. I said, I'm going to call you. Give me your number. I said, I'm going to start something. I'd love for you to play drums. So Tony probably still hates me, but Dean had a good time. We had a good time. And Dean called me. Long story short, I got a call. We were about to form the rest of the band. And I got a call from Jonathan Canning. He was down in Los Angeles with John Waite and Ricky Phillips, you know, formerly of the Babies. And Jonathan said, you know, we're putting together this band. Would you like to come down and check it out? And I said, well, I just met this drummer, Dean, and if I can bring him, I'll come. Otherwise, I'm going to hang with Dean. Right. Because I thought that he was that strong, you know, of a player. And I'm a drum freak. I have to have good drums, you know. And so we went down and we jammed for a day, and it just kind of clicked. So we said, okay, we're in. You know, I always loved John Waite's voice, and, you know, Jonathan's always been a great songwriter. Same with Waite and everybody else. And so we shortly went into the studio right after that. We wrote for a little bit. We went into the studio down in Los Angeles. I moved down there because the band was based out of there. And we went in with Richie Zito and pretty much knocked the record out in a couple weeks. Yeah. And, you know, that was it.
Cool. Cool. Well, Neal, it's great to hear some of the non-Journey stories from you. I really enjoy that. But when it comes to Journey, you've given us so many songs through the years that have just become the soundtrack of our lives, and just want to thank you for that, and thank you to you and your beautiful wife, Michaela, for coming into town for the Les Paul 100th birthday. Ladies and gentlemen, Neal Schon. Thanks so much, Neal.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
I could have went on for another.
We'll do it another
for another
time.
2 hours. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.